There's 5 things that I do every fall to get ready for winter. Living in Minnesota most of my life, I've really lived through several winters that have been very snowy, very cold, and have luckily not had any significant vehicle issues. And a big part of that is just doing regular maintenance and getting ready and preparing for the winter. So here are the 5 things that I do every fall to get ready for winter. The first one I do is just routine maintenance. So whether you bring your vehicle in for routine maintenance or you do it yourself, it's important to go through all of the list and make sure all the fluids are fine. Windshield wiper fluid, especially with sleet and snow and junk like that, but also battery. You want to make sure that the battery health is good, that you're going to have a good start every time, no matter if it's really cold. Tread depth, tire rotation, oil change, just getting all that routine stuff checked off the list. The other big thing is four-wheel drive. So you want to make sure that your four-wheel drive is functioning. If you don't routinely drive in four-wheel drive at least once a month, be sure to shift it into four-wheel drive, drive around, not on dry pavement, ideally gravel or something loose, drive around a little bit, make sure everything engages just fine. It just helps keep your vehicle running smoothly, and you just don't have to worry about any of those things during the winter. So maintenance is number one. The next thing you can do to get ready for winter is just making sure you have enough supplies. So luckily, if you're into camping or overlanding or whatever like that, you have a lot of supplies that have dual use. So that includes camp stoves or boots or electric blanket or a battery generator. Any of those things you can use or that you normally use for camping or overlanding, you can doubly use just to keep in your vehicle during the winter for that extra layer of safety. One of the best things that I think is useful to have in the winter is one of these jump starters. This is the Noco GB40, and this is enough to jumpstart your 4Runner. What I like about this is that it's super easy, it's super compact. If you have a dead battery, you can jump it. If you have other people with dead batteries, you can jump those. This has enough strength in it to jumpstart most large SUVs. It also doubles as a flashlight and also a way to power your phones and recharge your phones even if the vehicle is completely dead. So I really like this. I don't really like hooking up jumper cables to a 4Runner to jump someone else's vehicle. And the reason for that is that you put so much work into the electrical system. I really don't want some other vehicle to mess with this vehicle's electrical system. It's just better to have this independent jump starter battery. You can jump start your friend's car, no problem, and don't have to worry about jump starting with your own vehicle. So that's a huge important thing to have. One thing that I like to have pretty much all the time is this dual fuel stove. It runs on butane, but also propane. The reason I like this is that it's independent of any sort of electricity or gasoline. You can take this elsewhere. You can run it wherever you want, far away from the vehicle if you need to. We use this pretty much whenever we go camping. I like having this also with a metal pot, and the reason for that is that you can boil water. If there's plenty of snow, you can boil water and then you have clean water. If you're stranded in your vehicle in the winter, having some warm tea or even just warm water that's clean, that's a good thing to have. You can just dump hot water into these, boiling water into these, and you can have a really good meal. Expires in 2054. That's ridiculous. If you were stranded in the snow for a day or two, that actually wouldn't be that big of a problem. You really don't want it to be a big problem. Food, water, heat, heated blankets, insulated boots, any of those things, it's really good to have those things on hand. You know, I've got my snow scraper, but then also a shovel. I have a couple of different shovels in here, but I have a good shovel to actually shovel out a good amount of snow. So you want something that's decent, that's metal, that's not going to break. You don't want some plastic flimsy thing. And then water. You know, I carry a couple bags of water pretty much all the time. Even if these freeze, they have enough expansion where they're not going to rupture. Of course, a first aid kit. If there's a lot of dense snow and it's hard to get through, or you're trapped and someone's injured, you might actually be just on your own for a while. And so it's really good to have an adequate first aid kit with you. So if you're stranded or stuck somewhere, communication is key. So all of us have phones. Generally, that's going to be adequate 99% of the time. You want to make sure that your phone is able to be charged with the vehicle turned off. So again, that goes back to that battery jump starter that acts as a battery charger for your cell phone. Some people like to have portable battery supplies like the EcoFlow or Anchor, something like that. You can carry that in the back and have it continually charging as the vehicle is running. So that way you never run out and it's always charged to 100%. Those lithium iron phosphate batteries in those portable battery generators, they can withstand several charges and discharges. So it's not a problem to keep them plugged in and keep them charged and topped off all the time. That can also generate power enough to run your heated blanket. If your vehicle is not running for some reason, that you can still stay warm without having to risk carbon monoxide. You don't want to be running a stove or anything like that interior where you get carbon monoxide. One thing that I'll do is switch out my summer boots with my winter boots. So these are called Kamik, and these are insulated winter boots, and I really like these because they're completely rubber, they're waterproof up to here, and so you can get through thick slush. These have not leaked. They still stay flexible even in the super cold, and they're very insulative. So these are from Canada, and I really like them. They slip on and off. There's no laces, nothing like that. It's super easy to just slide on and off, and they're surprisingly warm considering their weight and size. They're not super bulky. They're not super huge. I'm just a real big fan of these types of boots. Of course, you can have so much more other gear with you all the time, but realistically, if you're trying to conserve on weight, those are kind of the biggest types of supplies that you should have on hand getting ready for the winter. The next thing you can do to get ready for winter is rust prevention. So that includes undercoating and rust prevention on the door sills, the hinges, the screw heads, anything where there is steel and metal. Rust prevention is a huge thing. It's much better to preserve and prevent rust than it is to try to deal with rust once it's there. Now, I take my vehicle to Z-Bart, who does undercoating, and there's the initial treatment, and then there's the annual maintenance treatment after that, where they just touch things up. Now, they also will put a rust inhibitor on any areas of rust that may have happened, and then they coat it again. And the coating is more of an asphalt base. It looks really nice, and it helps protect everything against salt. The thing I like about that undercoating is that it is not sticky and it doesn't stay wet. It actually dries. So here you can see on the frame just little spots of rust that have kind of poked through the undercoating. It's really not bad, but just a few little spots. We'll see how that gets touched up. You can see along the frame right here, most of it's just kind of dirt, but a few little spots of rust here and there. There's a little bit of rust right there. There's a little spot of rust right there. Not too bad. Overall, this has actually held up really pretty well over this last year. I'll take the spare tire off also so they can get all up underneath there and really spray and clean out that area too. The other thing that I like is fluid film. I'm a huge fan of fluid film. Now, fluid film is different than an asphalt-based undercoating. They all have different purposes. What I like about this is that this doesn't get sticky and it doesn't dry. It also helps lubricate. Before we get that wheel spare tire up here, we are going to spray a little bit of fluid film into this area under this chain while we crank it. And we're going to spray the fluid film in there a few more times Now you get the spare tire back up in place. It's a good opportunity to double check the spare tire is inflated, has adequate PSI, and that there's no problems with it. Again, this is a 33-inch tire. It's just a KO, not a KO2 or anything, just a KO for a spare. Just cranked so it's snug. Moved around, make sure it's not loose at all. Also a good opportunity to make sure you have all of your jack and tire iron, lift, all that stuff that you have in order to change a tire. You don't want to be digging for that stuff in the winter when it's cold. So if you look on the underside, there's little holes on the bottom of each sill, and you can just spray fluid film up in there. And then also the sills all along here, those are very high likelihood for rust to develop. I also will use this along any sort of bolts and helps keep those preventing rust, or any sort of moving part, springs, shocks, anything like that, I'll coat with fluid film. What I really like about fluid film is that it's not toxic, it's not hazardous, it doesn't have any solvents, it's not going to wreck any sort of rubber or plastic, and it also doesn't conduct electricity, is you can use it all around the house for different things. So I use it for the garage door springs, the hinges, even hinges of windows. I will use this. And then what I'll do is I'll take like a towel or a rag and just kind of wipe it so it forms a nice layer over all of that. So when you're doing this fluid film, be sure you get these little hinges all up in here, down in here. As an extra bonus, I put a coat of fluid film on the front bumper. So even though this is very nicely powder coated, there's not a speck of rust on it, but I also still coat it with fluid film, especially around weld points where you might get salt that just sits there and accumulates. So just a nice layer wiped down of fluid film over the entire front bumper, and that will help keep it nice and rust-free for many, many years. Also, you can hit these bolts, hit these bolts, any of those bolts deep down in there. Make sure that none of those get rusty also. Other spots, be sure you get in these little holes right here, these drainage holes. Spray all up in there. Get it all up inside there and all around the edges. Wherever there's little pinch welds, that's where you want to spray the fluid film. The next thing you can do to get ready for winter is to make sure that you have a way of getting yourself out of deep snow, snowy situations in a snowbank, or getting other people out of snowbanks. That includes recovery equipment and recovery points, both in the front and in the rear. I have this shackle mounted hitch, and with a Rhino USA pin that is locking. What I like about this locking is that it covers up the keyhole. So salt and snow and dirt and debris covers that up and keeps that nice and clean. What I like is to have this mounted and ready in order to be able to tow or pull someone out of a ditch, or even pull yourself out of a ditch or out of a snowbank. So it's all hooked up and it's ready. You don't have to try to do this with cold hands. It also gives you just that little extra protection on the back of your vehicle in case another vehicle slides into you. So before putting this in, I like to make sure that there's a nice layer of fluid film all up in this area. I like to put a little fluid film on the pin and on the hitch itself. Okay, and then I put this back in place. Just make sure we're good with fluid film all on in the threads, and then thread it back in place. So that is all ready to go. That's a nice anchor point. It's a nice tow point for getting out of a ditch or pulling other people out of a ditch. Ready for winter now. So recovery points on the front, these make great recovery points. You also have these toe points on the underside. Just a quick note, I'm a huge fan of this CBI front bumper. We had an episode where we had to hook this up to an excavator and it was not gentle at all. And these recovery points worked great without any sort of problem at all. This is a strong, strong bumper, and I am so glad that I got it. If you have a winch that you haven't used in a while, it's probably a good idea to reel it out a little bit, make sure everything is functioning, make sure that everything is wound up nicely without any sort of issues at all. Of the equipment that I use for recovery, I keep pretty much all up in here. I make sure that everything is ready to go and fairly easily accessible. This is the tag for the winch, keeps your fingers out of the pinching areas. Here are some soft shackles. I actually have 4 soft shackles. I have 2 of these generic ones. Actually, these are Kodiak brand. And then I have 2 of the Rhino USA brands. I have a tree saver strap right here that I use. And I keep everything nice and bundled and organized. In here, I actually have the toe strap of a Rhino USA toe strap and soft shackles. You can see everything is all wound up, nice and ready to go. You don't want to have to be fumbling through a bunch of stuff looking for stuff when you need to get recovered, or trying to recover yourself or someone else, or when it's super, super cold out or full of snow. And then in here, I have my kinetic rope. So that keeps it in a nice sealed container. I don't have to worry about any debris getting it full of snow or whatever. I also have a couple of extra shackles. So that's what I keep in here in my rooftop carrier. I like keeping it in this carrier because it is nice and sealed. It's always there. I don't have to worry about it. And I may not actually even use any of it all winter. So I don't have to have it inside the vehicle taking up space. I just have it right here, and it's accessible pretty much all the time in this Pelican case. One thing that's often looked over is having traction boards. They're so easy. These are just the Stegodon brand, so it's kind of an off brand. They're pretty decent. They've held up. I've had these for about a year or so now. They've held up pretty decently. So I tie a rope with a long cord on each side, so when they get buried in the snow or mud or whatever like that, you can see where it is. Just extend this cord off to the side and you can pull it out of the buried snow or whatever pretty easily. So I keep traction boards handy in the back of the car pretty much all the time. And it's just such an easy thing, and that might be all that you really need. In fact, if someone else needed to get out of a snowbank or whatever, I would reach for the traction boards first and see if they could get out on their own, maybe shoveling, maybe traction boards, and that's really about it, before I even worry about any sort of recovery with a hitch or straps or anything like that at all. It's way safer just to do traction boards. Just a quick note about recovery equipment. Don't use recovery equipment if you don't know how to use it. So education is a big, big thing to keep in mind before using any sort of recovery gear. That includes toe straps, kinetic ropes, winch, anything like that. You don't want to be hurting yourself, hurting someone else. Just because you have the equipment doesn't mean that you should use it. Assess the situation, know how to use all the equipment before using any of it. So the next thing that you should do to get ready for winter is just start getting into the habit of keeping your tank half full at least. So when it starts getting less than half tank, go ahead and get gas. You don't want to dip below half a tank. And the reason for that is that you just never know how long you'll have to sit with the car idling for heat, or what roads might be closed. You may have to take detours or bypasses, anything like that, different routes that you might be completely unexpected, and you don't want to be caught without gas. In the summertime, you can get down to a quarter of a tank and then fill it, but in the wintertime, where you really need to depend on heat for survival, really, if you run into a situation, you really don't want it getting less than a half of a tank. I can tell you of a story just real quick of why that was important. I was heading home late one night, and it happened to be during a heavy snowstorm. Heavy, thick, wet snow. And it was so heavy that many trees were coming down and blocking the roads that I typically will drive on. It got to be so bad that I would actually have to stop, either move some heavy branches or trees that may have fallen across a road, but it got to be very dangerous, where you could actually hear the trees cracking and falling down around me. Along with that were mixed with power lines. I stopped what I was doing, I reversed, I got out of that situation and went an alternate road home. Now that road was also blocked. I had to go a third route home, which was way longer than expected. But because I had plenty of gas and just kept the gas tank near full all the time, it wasn't even a factor. It didn't matter. You know, I knew that I could stay warm. I knew that I had plenty of gas to idle the vehicle for a really long time if I needed. I knew I had food and water and all sorts of stuff. No problem there at all. And it took that element of stress just away. And so just getting in that mindset and getting in that habit of not letting your tank run less than a half of a tank during the winter, just getting in that mindset can really alleviate a lot of stress that might happen if you happen to get stuck or stranded somewhere for a while. So those are the top 5 things that I do every fall to get ready for winter. If you follow these, it just starts to become routine. And it's actually kind of fun to do. Follow these guidelines and you'll be ready for the coming winter. Thanks a lot. If you like this video, go ahead and subscribe, give it a thumbs up, share it. It really helps out a lot. Again, I'm super close to that 1,000 subscriber mark. So if you could do your part, subscribe, and maybe get me over 1,000 subscribers. Thanks a lot. We'll talk to you later. Bye.